welcome to the media studio at Enlit Europe in Frankfurt. Today I'm joined by Martin Vladimirov, and we're going to be talking about energy security risks in Europe. Welcome, Martin. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Let's dive straight into what are the most important security or energy security risks and sustainability risks in Europe that we are facing at the moment.
The Russian invasion in Ukraine was a rude wake-up call for the EU to rethink its long-term energy and climate security strategy based on, I think, four main dimensions, which is security of supply. Of course, the most important issue is to keep the lights on. Affordability risks, so the price of energy that all of the consumers are paying, which is skyrocketing right now. Reliability of supply, which is ensuring energy efficiency, storages and transmission lines are in full capacity and are maintained well. And sustainability risk, which is the long-term objective of the EU energy and climate policy, which is full decarbonization by 2050. How can we prevent the security supply situation in spiraling into basically a return to coal and natural gas use when we need to accelerate actually the energy transition? So what we have seen in the past 9 months is more or less an energy and climate security divide between the grand EU objectives as enlisted in the European Green Deal and the national priorities and path dependencies, which have become increasingly centered on preservation of the interests of certain private companies and industries within different member states. And this disconnect between the EU energy policy and national policies has become really a tug of war. Europe has been divided into national energy nationalists and countries that are that have shown solidarity with Ukraine, have shown solidarity with the sanctions, and have tried to actually accelerate the process of transition. So it's very difficult to keep the EU on the same page in terms of energy security policy. So we need to find a new way to synchronize policies. So we need an improvement of energy governance. So the biggest probably energy and climate security risk is bad governance and basically the ability of private companies and private interests to dominate national policies and national strategies rather than the vice versa.
Martin, thank you for painting that picture. I think it's logical to then ask, how do we mitigate these risks? I mean, how do we encourage that governance and private sector participation?
Well, the first step is to have a very good understanding of what the risks are. And the Center for the Study of Democracy has developed an index of energy and climate security risks, which we launched for the EU 27 countries. And we have tried to compare and contrast how different countries have fared over the last 15 years in terms of these four categories that I mentioned. The reason why we need such a policy instrument is that currently we have these long strategic documents called the National Energy and Climate Plans that few people actually read, and they actually represent a very specific national position, and very often they're disconnected from the common EU policies. And we need one policy instrument in a way to name and shame countries in basically improving on the previous years, trying to basically track their progress towards achieving these grand European Green Deal objectives, including security supply, decarbonization, energy efficiency, research and innovation, if you want, in low carbon technologies. We don't have such an instrument right now. This allows different countries to basically hide behind, bigger players on the EU and continue bad practices, continue path dependencies, for example, delaying the coal phase out, or providing state aid to fossil fuel producers, or undermining the process of energy transition through very difficult regulatory and administrative frameworks for investments in wind and solar. We have identified, for example, that Italy and Germany have been actually the most vulnerable countries in terms of energy and climate security risk. Their energy and climate security risk position have worsened the most since 2014. Actually, these two countries have single-handedly dragged all of Europe in a toxic dependence on Russian gas. even as we were trying to decarbonize, and even after the Crimean annexation, so even after Russia has already shown its real kind of purpose of undermining the Ukrainian sovereignty. And if we had an instrument that can really showcase how different countries are moving, in which direction they're moving, we would have been able to maybe forestall this process, try to prevent that and these national tendencies to oversee basically the EU objectives.
It's quite a challenging landscape that you paint for us, Martin. And quickly, one final question. If we zoom into Eastern Europe specifically, what kind of innovations are you seeing coming out of the region that is actually bolstering their energy security?
Well, the COVID pandemics and the recovery plans that came out of this difficult situation are showing a different direction for Central and Eastern Europe. Many of the countries in the region have, have revealed a very ambitious plan to decarbonize their economies based on a massive integration of renewable energy technologies, but also storage technologies. All across Central and Eastern Europe, we have massive projects for installing batteries. The problem, again, as with my kind of overview of the index, is that these instruments, these projects have not been basically assessed in terms of impact, in terms of costs, in terms of energy and climate security risk related. So they are massive, for example, storage, battery storage projects in the region, which, however, might be wasteful spending as well. So they're very good in terms of, switching the gears of the decarbonization in the region. They're going to allow the integration of more renewables. But do we need so much money into storage? So these kind of questions need to be asked, whether governments do their projects and their planning based on evidence-based research or based on more kind of the natural instinct to spend huge money on infrastructure projects. Another thing that is very important for Central and Eastern Europe is the unleashing of the offshore wind energy potential across the region. Poland has been having the most ambitious plan of picking up offshore wind, basically becoming the biggest offshore wind country in Europe by 2030. Romania has been working on national legislation. Bulgaria has been just working on national legislation. Actually, Center for the Study of Democracy built a regulatory framework for a new offshore wind sector in Bulgaria. Greece just actually passed an offshore wind energy legislation in parliament. So I think the region is gearing up to join Northern Europe in its quest for finding, the balance between, renewable energy technologies and baseload capacity, because offshore wind is the closest to a normal baseload power plant. And we have been lacking that in the region because most of the supply is intermittent, most of the renewable energy supply is intermittent, which has fed many disinformation narrative that we need to preserve at all costs coal-fired power plants in place, because otherwise the renewables would imbalance the system, would undermine the security supply in the electricity sector. These narratives, these, rumors, if you want, are quite exaggerated. And unfortunately, Germany, for example, in the past 9 months has sent a very bad signal to Central and Eastern Europe by relaunching its coal-fired power fleet. Just yesterday, 45% of electricity in Germany was produced by burning coal. So for many Central and Eastern European countries, this is a signal that we can continue with the status quo. We don't need to follow up with our phase-out plans. On the contrary, Western Europe needs to provide an example to Central and Eastern Europe that the best way forward is to decarbonize the electricity system via renewable energy investment, storage technology, and basically better demand response systems rather than, again, relying on a huge fleet of supply sources, which might not be necessary and might lead to, first of all, lock-in in a fossil fuel dependence, and second of all, into basically market distorting subsidies, because all of these coal-fired power plants in Europe are now producing electricity, including by receiving a lot of subsidies, and these subsidies are just not necessary.
A very complex situation indeed. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, Martin. It's been a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
And thank you to our viewers. Be sure to follow us on all of our channels for more details.